In the glittering world of high finance, where deals worth nations' GDPs are sealed over a single glass of whiskey, a man's past is usually a carefully curated footnote. For Alexander Sterling, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Nexus Innovations, the past was a locked room he never intended to revisit. But what happens when the key to that room isn't a memory, but a person? A person he once knew as a brilliant, fiery equal, now silently refilling his water glass, her face etched with a history he couldn't comprehend. This isn't a story about charity. It's a story about a debt, a betrayal, and a meticulously planned retribution that would send shockwaves through the tech world. The restaurant was a cathedral of modern opulence. Soaring glass walls offered a panoramic view of the glittering Los Angeles skyline, each distant light a tiny star in a sprawling man-made galaxy. Inside, the air hummed with the low thrum of power, the murmur of hushed conversations, the clinking of heavy silverware on bespoke porcelain, the subtle scent of money and expensive perfume. At a corner table, shielded by a strategically placed sculpture of twisted bronze, sat Alexander Sterling. At 35, he possessed the kind of sharp, predatory stillness that made other powerful men nervous. His suit was a custom-tailored Zegna dark as a moonless night, and his watch, a Patek Philippe, was a discreet nod to a fortune so vast it had become an abstraction. He was listening, or pretending to listen, as a venture capitalist named Robert Davies droned on about synergy and market disruption. Alex's mind, however, was elsewhere. It was a finely tuned machine, usually occupied with complex algorithms, stock valuations, and the quiet, ruthless chess game of corporate expansion. But tonight it was adrift. He was bored. The deal was already done. This dinner was a mere formality, a ritual he endured with practiced patience. His gaze drifted across the room, cataloguing the faces, the ambitious, the sycophantic, the predatory. It was a familiar ecosystem. And then he saw her. She was just a flicker at the edge of his vision, a waitress in a crisp black uniform, moving with a weary efficiency between tables. But there was something in the line of her jaw, the way she tucked a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear, that snagged his attention. His focus narrowed the background noise of the restaurant, fading to a dull roar. He watched her approach a nearby table, her movements fluid, but lacking the easy grace he remembered. Her smile was a pale, practiced thing, a mask that didn't quite reach her eyes. The venture capitalist Davies followed his gaze. "The service here is impeccable," he commented, oblivious. Alex didn't respond. His heart had begun a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. It couldn't be. Not here. Not like this. He remembered her under the sprawling oaks of the Princeton campus, her laughter echoing across the green. He remembered her in the library, surrounded by towers of books, her brow furrowed in concentration, arguing with a tenured professor about the nuances of string theory. He remembered her eyes, a startling, intelligent green flashing with passion and a fierce, unyielding ambition that had matched and sometimes surpassed his own. Isabella Vance. Izzy. The name echoed in the silent chambers of his memory, a relic from a different life. They had been inseparable in college, academic rivals, steadfast friends, co-conspirators in late-night study sessions, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared dream of changing the world. She was the brilliant astrophysicist, the poet who could distill the cosmos into a single, breathtaking verse. He was the computer science prodigy, the pragmatist who saw the world in lines of code. Everyone had assumed she would be the one to win a Nobel Prize, to have her name etched in the annals of science. The waitress turned, and for a heart-stopping moment, her eyes met his across the crowded room. The recognition was instantaneous. He saw it in the sudden widening of her eyes, the subtle faltering of her step, the way the professional smile evaporated, leaving behind a stark, vulnerable shock. A tray clattered somewhere in the distance. Her face, which had been a canvas of polite neutrality, was now awash with a complex tide of emotions, disbelief, shame, and a flicker of something that looked like old, forgotten pain. She recovered in a split second. Her mask of professionalism slammed back into place. She turned away abruptly, her shoulders rigid, and disappeared into the controlled chaos of the service area. The rest of the dinner was a blur for Alex. He nodded, he spoke, he even managed a thin smile, but his thoughts were a maelstrom. Izzy Vance, working as a waitress. It was a logical impossibility, a tear in the fabric of the universe he understood. What had happened? Where was the brilliant PhD from Stanford? Where was the research fellowship at CERN? She had been so ecstatic about. Alex. The final papers. Davies slid a leather-bound folder across the table. Alex stared at it, his mind struggling to reconnect with the present. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen. As his hand moved to sign the multi-million-dollar acquisition deal, his eyes were fixed on the kitchen door through which she had vanished. He signed his name, a signature that could move markets, but his mind was signing a different kind of contract, an unspoken promise to unravel the mystery of the ghost at the gala. The dinner concluded. Hands were shaken, false pleasantries exchanged. As Davies and his entourage departed, Alex remained at the table. He gestured to another waiter, a young man with a hopeful, nervous energy. The waitress who was serving the table next to us. Alex began, his voice low and even, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. The woman with the reddish-brown hair. Is she still on her shift? The waiter glanced nervously towards the kitchen. Yes, sir. Isabella. Her shift ends in about 20 minutes. Isabella. Alex repeated the name softly. It felt foreign and familiar on his tongue. Thank you. He settled back in his chair, the city lights twinkling below him like a fallen constellation. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. Hey, Izzy, remember me? The guy who built a tech empire while you apparently fell off the face of the earth. It sounded absurd, cruel. He took out his wallet, removing not the sleek black corporate card, but a personal one. From the cash clip, he pulled out 10 crisp $100 bills. He laid them neatly on the table, placing his business card on top. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Nexus Innovations. It read, followed by his private cell number. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want to corner her in her place of work, to compound her apparent humiliation with his pity. But as his driver navigated the sleek sedan through the neon-drenched streets of LA, Alex stared out the window, not seeing the city. He saw a girl with fire in her eyes and starlight in her mind. The $1,000 tip and the business card were a simple gesture, a first move in a game he didn't yet understand. It was an opening, a question posed to the universe. He expected a call, a text, some acknowledgement. But for the next 48 hours, the only thing he received was silence. A profound, deafening silence that was more disturbing than any angry retort could ever be. And Alexander Sterling, a man who built his empire on finding solutions to intractable problems, realized that the mystery of Isabella Vance was a problem he could not and would not let go of. 3 days bled into a week. The billion-dollar acquisition was announced, sending ripples through the financial world. Nexus Innovations stock surged. Alex's face was on the cover of Forbes, a portrait of calm, calculated success. But inside his penthouse office, a glass and steel sanctuary overlooking the city, the calm was a facade. The silence from Isabella was a persistent, low-grade hum of static in his mind. It was illogical. $1,000 was a significant sum for anyone, let alone a waitress. His business card was an open door to anything. A job, a loan, a conversation. Pride, he reasoned, could account for some of it. Izzy had always been fiercely independent. But this level of disregard felt like something more. It felt like a wall. Penelope. Alex's voice cut through the quiet of his office. His executive assistant, Penelope Hayes, entered without a sound. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes, an impeccably tailored wardrobe, and an air of efficiency so profound it was almost a superpower. She had been with him for a decade, his gatekeeper, his scheduler, his external hard drive. "Sir," she said, her notepad ready. "I need you to find someone," Alex said, turning from the window to face her. He rarely made personal requests, and Penelope's expression remained neutral, but he noted a flicker of heightened attention in her eyes. "Her name is Isabella Vance, Vance. She would be around 34, 35 years old." He gave her the details he knew. Princeton class of 2012, majored in astrophysics. Last known trajectory was a PhD program at Stanford. And he added a slight hesitation in his voice. "She is currently working as a waitress at Aria, the restaurant downtown." Penelope's pen did not stop moving. If she found the request odd, she gave no indication. "What is the nature of the inquiry, sir? What information are you looking for?" Alex paused, considering. What was he looking for? A reason. An explanation for the chasm between the girl he knew and the woman he saw. "Everything," he said. Finally. "Academic records, employment, history, financial status, family details. I want to know what happened to her between Stanford and Aria. And Penelope. Sir, this is to be handled with absolute discretion. My name is not to be associated with this inquiry in any way. Use our top private investigation contractor. I want a complete file, but I don't want her to know she's being looked into. No ripples." "Understood, sir." She nodded, made a final note, and turned to leave. "One more thing," Alex said, stopping her at the door. "Prioritize it." For the next few days, Alex tried to immerse himself in his work. He chaired board meetings, dissected code with his lead engineers, and mapped out a 5-year strategy for Nexus. But his focus was fractured. During a tense negotiation with a German tech firm, he found his mind drifting, superimposing Izzy's tired face onto the stoic German CEO. He was distracted, and he hated it. He was a man who thrived on control, and this situation was a variable he couldn't quantify. A week later, Penelope entered his office and placed a thick, plain manila folder on his polished mahogany desk. She did not speak, simply stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Alex opened the folder. The first page was a summary. Subject: Isabella Marie Vance, DOB, May 12, 1990. Education: Princeton University. BS in Astrophysics, summa cum laude, 2012. Stanford University PhD candidate, Physics, 2012-2015. Withdrew for personal reasons. The word withdrew was a red flag. Izzy didn't withdraw. She conquered. He flipped the page. Financials. It was a bleak landscape of red ink and dwindling numbers. Student loans from Princeton, now in deferment and accruing interest. A mountain of medical debt flagged with names of oncology centers and long-term care facilities. Credit card statements showed a life lived on the margins grocery store. Purchases, gas rent payments for a small apartment in a less than desirable part of the San Fernando Valley. There were two sources of income, a meager payroll deposit from Aria and another from a place called the Griddle House, a 24-hour diner. She was working 2 jobs, barely keeping her head above water. The next section was on her family. Her father, a history professor named Richard Vance, had passed away 6 years ago. An aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. The timeline lined up almost perfectly with her withdrawal from Stanford. Her mother, Hannah Vance, was listed as living in a modest assisted living facility in Pasadena. Her diagnosis was listed multiple sclerosis progressive relapsing type. The cost of her care was astronomical. He saw it then, the skeleton of the story. A brilliant young woman on the fast track to academic stardom. A family crisis, a dying father, a sick mother. The impossible choice between her future and her family. She had chosen family. The PhD, the dream, was the sacrifice. Alex leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. It was tragic. It was noble. It explained her financial ruin and her presence at the restaurant. It explained the exhaustion in her eyes. But it didn't explain the wall. It didn't explain why she had cut herself off from everyone. Why she wouldn't even respond to his gesture. People who make such sacrifices are often proud, but they aren't ghosts. There was a piece missing. He flipped to the last section of the report, academic and professional details. It included a list of her published undergraduate papers, her thesis abstract, and the proposed topic of her doctoral dissertation at Stanford. The title was long and dense with technical jargon, a unified framework for quantum error correction in multi-qubit systems using isomorphic graph theory. Even to Alex, a man who lived and breathed complex systems, it was heady stuff. It was groundbreaking. The report noted that her faculty advisor at Stanford, a renowned professor named Alistair Finch, had called her early work revolutionary. Then came the final innocuous-looking paragraph. It was a cross-referenced search of academic and tech journals for keywords related to her dissertation topic. Keywords and core concepts from Vance's proposed research show significant overlap with Project Chimera, a flagship quantum computing initiative currently under development at Viridian Dynamics. The lead scientist on Project Chimera is Dr. Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a fellow PhD candidate in the same lab as Vance at Stanford from 2012 to 2016. Alex's blood ran cold. Viridian Dynamics was his chief competitor, a ruthless corporate behemoth known for its aggressive acquisition strategies and ethically grey R&D practices. And Marcus Thorne. The name was another echo from the past. He was a smart but insecure student in their circle at Princeton, always trailing in Izzy's and Alex's wake. He'd been ambitious, but in a grasping, desperate way. He'd followed Izzy to Stanford. Suddenly, the silence from Izzy wasn't just pride. It was the silence of defeat. The silence of someone who had not only lost everything, but had it stolen from her. The missing piece wasn't a tragedy. It was a betrayal. Alex closed the folder, his knuckles white. The image of Marcus Thorne's smug face from a recent tech publication flashed in his mind. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the celebrated genius behind Viridian's quantum leap. "Penelope," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She was there in an instant, as if she had been waiting just outside the door. "Get me everything you can find on Project Chimera at Viridian Dynamics, and I want a deep dive profile on Dr. Marcus Thorne. I don't want his corporate bio. I want his real story. I want to know who he talks to, where he eats, what skeletons are in his closet. And this time, don't use the contractor." He looked up at her, his eyes hard as flint. "Use the A-team, the ones who handled the Ethelred acquisition." Penelope's composure finally broke with a minuscule, almost imperceptible intake of breath. The A-team was his in-house unit of elite cybersecurity experts and digital forensics investigators, the corporate equivalent of a SEAL team. They were a closely guarded secret, deployed only for the most critical and sensitive operations. This was no longer a personal inquiry. It had just become a declaration of war. The address Penelope had given him was for a rundown two-story apartment complex in Van Nuys, the kind with faded stucco walls and iron railings, weeping rust stains. The air smelled of asphalt and dust. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of Princeton or the rarefied air of his penthouse. Alex sat in his car, a discreet grey Audi, for a full 10 minutes. The file on Marcus Thorne lay on the passenger seat, a testament to his team's terrifying efficiency. It contained emails, financial records, and academic data trails that painted a damning picture. But data wasn't enough. He needed the story, the human element from Izzy herself. Approaching her at Aria was a mistake. Cornering her here felt like an even greater intrusion, but it was a necessary one. He got out of the car, the expensive fabric of his suit feeling out of place in the gritty environment. He found apartment 2B and knocked. The door was thin, and he could hear movement inside, then silence. He knocked again, firmer this time. "Who is it?" The voice was hers, but strained, wary. "Izzy. It's Alex. Alex Sterling." A longer silence followed. He could imagine the war of thoughts happening on the other side of that door. Finally, he heard the click of a deadbolt and the rattling of a chain. The door opened a few inches, and one of her green eyes, shadowed with fatigue, peered out at him. "What are you doing here, Alex?" she asked, her voice flat. "Can I come in? We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." She started to close the door. "Marcus Thorne," he said, the name a key turning in a rusty lock. "Project Chimera, Viridian Dynamics." The door stopped moving. He saw her knuckles go white where she gripped the edge. Slowly, she unlatched the chain and opened the door. The apartment was small and sparse, but impeccably clean. A worn-out sofa was pushed against one wall, a small table with 2 chairs near a tiny kitchenette. Stacks of textbooks, not on astrophysics, but on nursing and medical administration, were piled neatly in a corner. The only personal touch was a framed photo on a small end table. A younger, smiling Izzy, with a man who had to be her father, and a woman with her same warm eyes. She didn't invite him to sit. She stood in the middle of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a defensive posture. She was wearing faded jeans and a simple t-shirt, and without the restaurant uniform, she looked younger and infinitely more vulnerable. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. Her voice trembling slightly. "I had people look into it," he said, deciding that blunt honesty was the only path forward. "I saw you at the restaurant. You didn't call. I knew something was wrong. I didn't expect this. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. You had me investigated. Of course you did. The great Alexander Sterling solving another problem with his checkbook and his resources. What did you want Alex to swoop in? Write a check and feel good about your charity for the day. The accusation stung because it was partially true. That had been his first instinct. At first, maybe, he admitted, but this is not about charity anymore. This is about theft. He stole your work, Izzy. Your life's work. Her defensive shell finally cracked. Her shoulders slumped and the fight seemed to drain out of her. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Her voice was muffled when she spoke again. You don't understand, she said. You can't. Then make me understand, he said, his voice softening. He moved closer and sat on the arm of the sofa, not crowding her, but closing the distance. Tell me what happened. She was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room, the hum of an old refrigerator. Then she began to speak, her voice low and laced with the pain of a memory she had tried to bury for years. Marcus and I were partners in the lab, she began. He was always competitive, but I thought it was friendly. I thought we were friends. My research. It was my baby. It was a new way of stabilizing qubits, a way to make quantum computing scalable. It was theoretical, but it was solid. Professor Finch said it could change everything. She took a shaky breath. Then I got the call about my dad. The diagnosis was fast, aggressive. I started flying back and forth between Palo Alto and home. I was barely sleeping, trying to keep up with my research while helping my mom take care of him. I was falling apart. Alex listened his own memory, supplying the context. He recalled Marcus as a shadow always present, but never central. His eyes holding a mixture of admiration and envy whenever he looked at Izzy. Marcus was so helpful, she continued, a note of self-loathing in her voice. He'd offer to run my simulations to collate my data. He'd say, Izzy, you go be with your family. I've got this. He seemed so compassionate. I was so grateful, so exhausted, and so stupid. I gave him access to all my raw data, my notebooks, my draft thesis. I trusted him. She looked up at Alex, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. My dad died 6 months later. The medical bills had already wiped out my parents' savings. Then soon after, my mum got her MS diagnosis. The costs were impossible. I couldn't stay at Stanford. I couldn't afford it, and my mum needed me. So I took a leave of absence, which I knew meant I was never going back. I told Marcus I was withdrawing. And he just let you go, Alex asked, his voice tight. He was sympathetic. He said it was a tragedy, a huge loss for science. He promised to keep my work safe, to make sure I got credit if he ever built upon it. He said we were a team. Then a few weeks later, he stopped answering my calls. A year after that, I saw a press release from Viridian Dynamics. They announced a massive breakthrough in quantum computing, a new project called Chimera, and the genius leading it was their new star hire, Dr. Marcus Thorne. The story hung in the air between them, heavy and toxic. She had been drowning, and the person she thought was a friend hadn't thrown her a life raft. He'd held her head under water and stolen her watch. I knew it was my work, she whispered. The language they used, the core concepts, it was all mine. But what could I do, Alex? I was a broke, disgraced PhD dropout. He was a celebrated doctor, backed by a corporation with a legal team, bigger than the army of a small country. Who would believe me? I had no money, no energy, no proof that wasn't on a server I no longer had access to. So you just gave up? I had to, she said, her voice breaking. I had to survive. I had my mum's medical bills, my brother's college tuition to think about. I promised my dad I'd get him through. So I started waitressing. I took on a second job. I buried Isabella Vance, the physicist. She was gone. It was easier to pretend she never existed than to live with what he did to me. Now he understood the silence. The $1,000 tip wasn't a lifeline. It was an insult. It was a reminder of the world she had lost handed to her by a man who represented the pinnacle of that world. His success was a mirror reflecting her own devastating failure. Alex stood up and walked to the small window looking out at the cracked pavement below. The raw injustice of it was a physical thing, a coiling knot of fury in his gut. This wasn't just corporate espionage. It was the desecration of a brilliant mind. It was the slow, deliberate murder of a dream. He turned back to face her. The weariness was still there, but now, having spoken her truth, a tiny spark of the old Izzy, the fighter, had returned to her eyes. He didn't just steal your data, Izzy, Alex said, his voice low and cold as ice. He built his entire career on your back. The patents Viridian filed, his promotions, his bonuses. It's all built on a foundation of your genius and his deceit. I know, she said quietly. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He counted, his gaze intense. He wasn't just your friend. He was part of our circle. What he did wasn't just an attack on you. It was a betrayal of everything we all stood for. Back then, the idea that brilliance and hard work were what mattered. He walked back and stood before her. He wasn't the billionaire CEO anymore. He was the friend she should have been able to call 6 years ago. I'm not going to write you a check, Izzy. I'm not going to offer you a pity job, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that filled the small apartment. I'm going to give you something better. I'm going to give you your name back. We are going to expose Marcus Thorne for the fraud that he is. We are going to burn his stolen empire to the ground. Isabella stared at him, her eyes wide. For the first time in years, a flicker of something long dormant ignited within her. It wasn't quite hope, not yet. It was something far more dangerous, the first tremor of a coming earthquake. The ghost of Isabella Vance, the physicist, was beginning to stir. The days that followed were a whirlwind of clandestine activity, a stark contrast to Izzy's monotonous routine of balancing trays and refilling coffee cups. Alex transformed a secure, unused conference room at the Nexus Tower into their war room. It was a sterile space of glass and steel, which they quickly cluttered with whiteboards, monitors, and stacks of documents. For Izzy, stepping into that world was like breathing oxygen after years of being underwater. At first, she was hesitant, intimidated by the sheer scale of Alex's resources. But as Alex and his A-team, a surprisingly young and intense trio of digital wizards who introduced themselves as Cade Reyes, and Anya began laying out the evidence, her hesitation morphed into a cold-focused rage. Marcus was sloppy. Cade, a lanky coder with a penchant for energy drinks, explained, pointing to a complex data flow chart on a massive screen. When he copied your data from the university servers, he used a batch script that altered the metadata. But he didn't wipe the original server logs. The university's IT security was frankly pathetic. We found the original access logs, time-stamped. It shows his credentials accessing and downloading your entire project directory a week after you officially withdrew. Reyes, a forensic analyst with a quiet, methodical demeanor, pulled up another screen. There's more. You kept digital notebooks on a private cloud server, didn't you? A service called Atomize. Izzy's eyes widened. Yes, I completely forgot about that. It was a small startup service. I used it to back up my personal notes, my half-formed ideas. The startup went bust in 2016, Reyes said with a thin smile. But their servers weren't wiped. They were just mothballed. We acquired them last week. Alex allowed himself a small, predatory smile. A minor expenditure. On the screen, Reyes pulled up files that made Izzy's breath catch in her throat. They were her own thoughts, her own unique intellectual fingerprint diagrams, scribbled on a digital whiteboard. Late-night musings, equations that were precursors to her final framework. Crucially, they were all created and time-stamped months, even years, before Marcus Thorne claimed to have his eureka moment at Viridian. It was the smoking gun. A pristine, undeniable record of her creative process. We have him, Anya, the team's strategist, stated. A direct chain of plagiarism. We can sue. Viridian's legal team is formidable, but this evidence is conclusive. It would be a long, messy fight, but we would win. Alex looked at Izzy. He saw the fire in her eyes, brighter than he'd seen it since college. But he also saw the shadow of the last 6 years. A lawsuit would drag on for years, subjecting her to depositions, public scrutiny, and the grinding machinery of the legal system. It was justice, but it was a blunt instrument. No, Alex said, his voice cutting through the room. Everyone turned to him. A lawsuit is too slow. It's too clean. Marcus doesn't deserve a quiet settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. He deserves to be exposed. The world hailed him as a genius. The world needs to see him as a fraud. He turned to Anya. Viridian is hosting their annual Future Forward Summit in 3 weeks, aren't they? Anya nodded. Yes, at the LA Convention Center. It's their biggest event of the year. They unveil their new tech court investors. It's a huge media event. And who? Alex asked, his voice dripping with intent. Is the keynote speaker? Anya's eyes lit up with understanding. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He's scheduled to present the next phase of Project Chimera. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Alex's face. Then that's our stage. We're not going to file a lawsuit. We're going to stage a public execution. The plan was audacious, high risk, and quintessentially Alex. It was a strategy born from the world of hostile takeovers and disruptive technology applied to a quest for personal vengeance. The next 2 weeks were a blur of intense preparation. Izzy, invigorated and driven, worked alongside the team. She became the subject matter expert, dissecting Marcus's published papers and presentations on Project Chimera. With a bitter sense of irony, she pointed out the flaws, the areas where he clearly didn't understand the deeper implications of the work he had stolen. Look here, she would say, pointing to a line of code in the Chimera prototype. He's using my foundational algorithm, but he's treating it like a black box. He doesn't understand the underlying isomorphic principles. He's brute-forcing solutions where an elegant one exists. He's a carpenter trying to perform brain surgery. This insight was crucial. Alex's team didn't just want to prove he stole the past. They wanted to prove he didn't understand the future he was claiming to build. They began preparing a counter-presentation, a devastating side-by-side comparison of her original elegant work and his clumsy plagiarized implementation. Alex, meanwhile, pulled the strings. He used his influence to secure a block of prime seats at the summit for a delegation from a Swiss investment firm, a shell company his team had created. He arranged for high-quality, discreet recording equipment, and he made a call to a woman named Sylvia Chen, a ruthless, highly respected tech journalist known for her ability to smell blood in the water. He gave her an anonymous encrypted tip: "Be at the Viridian keynote. There's a story there that will redefine the term intellectual property theft." The night before the summit, the war room was tense. The final presentation was loaded onto a secure encrypted drive. The plan was rehearsed down to the second. Izzy stood before one of the whiteboards, staring at a diagram of her own, making a diagram she hadn't seen in 6 years. "Are you ready for this?" Alex asked, coming to stand beside her. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. The exhaustion that had been her constant companion for years was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "He took my future, Alex. He left me to rot. For 6 years I've been a ghost. Tomorrow I stop being invisible." She was no longer Isabella Vance, the waitress. She was Dr. Vance, the physicist, and she was coming to reclaim her name. Alex felt a profound sense of pride. This was the Izzy he remembered. He had provided the resources, the opportunity, but the strength, the fire, the brilliance that was all hers. He had only forged the sword. She was the one who would wield it. The Los Angeles Convention Center buzzed with the electric energy of 1,000 true believers. Tech journalists, venture capitalists, engineers, and CEOs milled about their lanyards, flapping their faces illuminated by the glow of their smartphones. The air was thick with jargon and ambition. The centerpiece of the entire event was the main auditorium, where a massive screen displayed the logo of Viridian Dynamics and its flagship project, Chimera. Seated in the 10th row were Alex Izzy and Penelope disguised as the Swiss investors. Alex, in a tailored grey suit, looked perfectly at home. Penelope was a mask of serene professionalism, but Izzy was a tightly coiled spring of nervous energy. She wore a simple, elegant, dark blue dress Alex had insisted she buy. It felt like a costume. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. "Deep breaths," Alex murmured to her, his voice inaudible to anyone else. "You've done the work. All you have to do now is watch." The lights dimmed. A slick corporate video played filled with soaring music and abstract graphics of quantum waves. Then the CEO of Viridian, a polished man named Gerald Finch, walked onto the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. "Innovation isn't just a word at Viridian. It's our lifeblood," he boomed. "And the man who is the heart of that innovation, the visionary who is leading us into the quantum age, is here to show you the future. Please welcome the head of Project Chimera, Dr. Marcus Thorne." Marcus walked onto the stage to a hero's welcome. He was exactly as Alex remembered him, from photos confident, handsome, in a conventional way, wearing a trendy blazer over a black t-shirt. He soaked in the applause, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He looked out at the sea of faces, the adoring crowd completely unaware that his executioner was sitting just a few yards away. "Thank you, Gerald." Marcus began, his voice smooth and practiced. "The future isn't coming. It's already here. For the past 6 years, my team and I at Viridian have been working on a problem that has baffled scientists for decades: quantum decoherence. How do we build a stable quantum computer? And today, I'm proud to say, we have found the answer." He launched into his presentation. On the giant screen behind him, slides appeared showcasing complex equations and system architecture. In the 10th row, Izzy watched her expression, a mixture of nausea and fury. They were her equations, her architecture. She could see the places where he faltered, where his explanation was superficial, glossing over the deep theory he didn't truly grasp. Alex gave a subtle nod to Penelope. She discreetly tapped a command into a tablet hidden in her portfolio. Miles away in the Nexus war room, Cade and Reyes initiated their sequence. It was a multi-pronged digital assault, elegant and untraceable. They didn't hack the convention center's main system that was too crude. Instead, they exploited a zero-day vulnerability in the specific presentation software Viridian was using, allowing them to gain control of the feed going to the main projector. On stage, Marcus was hitting his stride. The key was a revolutionary new approach to error correction, a framework I developed in 2015, which I call the Thorne Isomorphic Lattice. "Now," Alex whispered to Izzy. As Marcus said the word lattice, the slide behind him flickered. For a split second, the Viridian logo was replaced by a different image, a page from Izzy's forgotten digital notebook showing the exact same lattice diagram. It was dated May 2014. Marcus faltered, glancing behind him. He saw nothing but his own slide. He blinked, thinking it was a glitch, a trick of the light. The audience murmured, confused. He tried to continue. "This lattice allows us to..." Flicker. This time the image was an email from Izzy to Marcus from 2014. The subject, Eureka. "I think I've solved the stabilization problem." The body of the email contained a rough version of the theory he had just claimed as his own. Marcus stopped talking. He stared at the screen behind him, but the slide had returned to normal. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was starting to panic. The crowd was no longer addering. They were whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones. Sylvia Chen. The journalist Alex had tipped off was on her feet, her eyes wide, her photographer already snapping pictures. "There seems to be a slight technical issue," Marcus stammered, trying to force a laugh. "No issue, Marcus." Alex's voice boomed through the auditorium. It wasn't coming from the stage. It was coming from the room's own sound system. Reyes had seamlessly patched Alex's microphone into the main audio feed. Alex stood up, a commanding presence in the middle of the crowd. Every eye in the room swiveled to him. "Why don't you explain the slide from May 2014? Alex asked, his voice calm and lethal. On the screen behind Marcus, the glitches were no longer glitches. The feed was now fully under Cade's control. A split screen appeared. On the left was Marcus's presentation. On the right, a cascade of evidence began to scroll Izzy's time-stamped files. The university server logs showing his illicit download emails where he praised her breakthrough. Marcus's face went white. He was exposed, trapped in the glare of the spotlight. "Who are you? What is this security?" But no one moved. Everyone was mesmerized by the damning evidence unfolding on the giant screen. "My name is Alexander Sterling," Alex announced, and a wave of gasps went through the crowd. The reclusive CEO of Nexus Innovations was here, orchestrating this. And this isn't a technical glitch, it's a correction. You see, Dr. Thorne is a fantastic storyteller, but he's got the main character wrong. He turned and gestured to the woman standing beside him. He helped Izzy to her feet. She was trembling, but as she stood, a wave of calm washed over her. The fear was gone. The Thorne isomorphic lattice was not developed by Marcus Thorne in 2015. Alex's voice resonated with cold fury. It was developed by Dr. Isabella Vance in 2014, a woman whose work you stole while she was home caring for her dying father, a woman you left with nothing. The final piece of evidence appeared on screen, a side-by-side analysis developed by Izzy herself, showing the elegance of her original theory versus the clumsy, incomplete version Marcus had implemented. It was a checkmate no one could dispute. The auditorium was in chaos. Cries of fraud and thief erupted. Viridian's CEO Gerald Finch was on his feet, his face a mask of purple rage and humiliation. Marcus Thorne stood frozen on the stage, a deer in the headlights of an oncoming freight train, his celebrated career vaporizing in real time before a global audience. Izzy looked at Marcus, not with hatred, but with a kind of distant pity. He looked small, pathetic, a hollow man stripped of his stolen glory. Their eyes met for a final time. In hers he saw not the ghost he had dismissed years ago, but the brilliant physicist whose legacy he had tried to erase. And he knew he was finished. Alex put a protective hand on Izzy's back and guided her through the erupting crowd toward the exit. The flashes of cameras were like lightning strikes capturing the fall of one career and the spectacular rebirth of another. They had not just won. They had delivered a form of justice so total, so public, it would be spoken of in the tech world for years to come. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Viridian Dynamics and Marcus Thorne. By the time Alex and Izzy were back in the Nexus Tower, the internet was ablaze. Viridian fraud and justice for Vance were trending worldwide. Sylvia Chen's article, complete with screenshots from the presentation, was a masterclass in journalistic evisceration. Viridian's stock plummeted in after-hours trading. Before the end of the day, they issued a statement Dr. Marcus Thorne had been terminated effective immediately, and a full internal investigation was being launched. They also announced they were being sued not by Izzy, but by their own investors in a class action lawsuit for securities fraud. Thorne, stripped of his credentials and facing potential criminal charges for academic and corporate fraud, vanished from public life, his name becoming a cautionary tale. In the quiet of Alex's office, the city lights beginning to sparkle below, Izzy felt a strange sense of emptiness. The fight was over. The dragon had been slain, but the years of struggle, the lost time, could not be erased. "So what now?" she asked softly, looking out the window. Alex came to stand beside her. He didn't offer platitudes about her victory. He understood the complex reality of her situation. "Now," he said, "you begin again. Not from scratch, from experience." He gestured for her to follow him. He led her not to the war room, but to a different locked section of the top floor. He opened a door to reveal a vast, empty space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a breathtaking view. It was a blank canvas. "What is this?" she asked. "This is the future R&D wing of Nexus Innovations," Alex said. "We're a software company, but we've been looking to expand into hardware and deep tech. I was planning to acquire a quantum computing startup." He paused, turning to face her directly. "But I've had a better idea. Why buy a company when I can partner with the most brilliant mind in the field?" He handed her a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. She opened it. It wasn't a job offer. It was a proposal for a joint venture, a new division within Nexus. It outlined a budget that made her head spin, complete autonomy over research, and a team she could build from the ground up. The name of the proposed division was the Vance Institute for Quantum Studies, and at the bottom it listed the leadership structure, Head of Research and Development, Dr. Isabella Vance. She was also offered a substantial equity stake, making her not just an employee, but a partner. Tears welled in Izzy's eyes as she looked at him. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a gift. It was an investment. It was recognition of her true worth. "I don't know what to say, Alex," she whispered. "Say you'll do it," he said simply. "Say you'll come and finish what you started. Build the future you were supposed to have." She looked from the proposal to the empty space, and for the first time she could see it. She could see labs' whiteboards filled with equations, a team of bright young minds. She could see herself not as a victim, but as a leader, a pioneer. "Yes," she said, a real radiant smile finally breaking through. "Yes, I'll do it." 6 months later, the Vance Institute was a hive of activity. Izzy, dressed in a lab coat over a stylish business suit, moved through the space with an energy and confidence that was dazzling to behold. She was a force of nature, her mind sharp, her passion infectious. Her mother, now in a top-tier medical facility, with her care fully covered, visited often. Her brother, his college education secure, was set to intern at the institute over the summer. Alex often found himself visiting the lab, leaning against a doorframe, just watching her. Their friendship had been reforged in the fires of their shared battle, emerging stronger and more profound than it had been in college. It was a partnership built on deep mutual respect. One evening, he found her staring at a complex quantum simulation on a holographic display. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, not taking her eyes off the swirling patterns of light. All that chaos, all that potential just waiting for the right framework to give it order. "It is," Alex agreed, though he was looking at her. He saw the girl from Princeton, the ghost from the restaurant, and the brilliant scientist all in one. "You did it, Izzy. You got your name back." She finally turned to him, her green eyes bright with a light that outshone the entire city skyline behind her. "No, Alex," she said softly. "We did it, and I'm not just getting my name back. I'm making it mean something again." This wasn't just a story of a millionaire helping a friend in need. It was a story about how true power isn't measured by the money in your bank account, but by your willingness to fight for what is right. Alexander Sterling could have simply written a check, and the world would have called him generous. Instead, he chose a harder path. He chose to fight a war not with armies, but with information strategy, and an unwavering belief in his friend's genius. He didn't just give Isabella Vance a handout. He gave her back her voice, her legacy, and the future that was stolen from her. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most shocking act of kindness isn't an act of charity, but an act of justice. If this story of friendship, betrayal, and ultimate vindication moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with a real twist. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible, true-life stories that will shock and inspire you. Thank you for watching.